Let me try that again. Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. Oh, okay. Well, then, this morning, I just want to thank Marian for setting up the beautiful decorations, not just in our sanctuary, so also in the chapel for the Portuguese and Brazilian community. Thank you for everything that you've done. And I also want to give a shout out to the AV crew. You know, they hardly ever get uh, praises because when you can't hear, the first thing we hear is we can't hear anything, and so it usually falls on them. But today I threw them a little bit of a curveball, and you wouldn't know it if I didn't say anything. So thank you to the AV team for all you do. This morning, I want to talk to you about generational faith, and then the actual sermon title in the bulletin is going to be next week, so you know what I'll be talking about next week also. But because of Mother's Day, I thought it would be fitting that we talk a little bit about the influence and the power that we have, or I should say that we experience. I don't have it because I'm not a woman. And I'm not a mother, even though at sometimes I may identify myself as a mother. And my wife the same, and vice versa. But I am not a woman. I'm not going to get into that debate. Did you know that our faith was meant to last much longer than our lives? Were you aware of that? Or did you ever wonder or think about that? That faith is never meant to terminate with us. It is entrusted to us for transmission. So I can see the gear working in your heads because you're looking at me like, what do you mean? Right? What do you mean by that? How many of you have ever wondered or thought back and remembered a time in your childhood when you may or may not have had the opportunity to sit with your mom and she just tell you a story? Do you remember those days? Do you yearn for those days? I know some of you don't have your moms anymore. So when we talk about faith, as we read this morning in our Bible text, Paul is writing to Timothy, explaining to him that the same faith that he has is a reflection of the faith that his mom had and that his mom's mom had, that they poured into each and every one of them. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. This is if you take anything away from today's sermon, take this: that the faith you have is a faith that does not die or should not die with you, but should be entrusted and to impact further in the next generations. Anna Jarvis. You know who that is? Well, you will. Anna Jarvis was the originator of the modern day Mother's Day celebration. She's the one who came up with this idea. This was back in the 1900s, where she instituted and celebrated moms, where they would come to church and they would offer honors upon them. This is early 1900s. So after she died, her mother's death, she sought to establish a day and a moment to honor her mother's death. But it wasn't until 1914 that President Woodrow Wilson officially declared Mother's Day a national holiday. Yet, even Anna Jarvis later lamented that the day became commercialized. I mean, we see that all too often, right? Once Labor Day hits, Valentine's Day hits, we don't have any other major holidays, and the next one is Mother's Day. And we see flowers, the prices go up, chocolates prices go up, all because it's been too commercialized. What are you giving to your mother on Mother's Day? Or you turn on the TV and commercials come on, it's like from K Jewelers expecting that, hey, what are you going to give your mothers? Give her a diamond because the diamond is forever. It's been so commercialized that we often miss the point. It's not about the gift. Don't get me wrong. I asked my wife what she wanted for Mother's Day, and she told me, and I will give it to her because that's something that she's been wanting for a while. But the gift is not the point. To honor your spouse, your wife, or to honor your mother with a gift, that's great and all, but if we have to understand the real power of why we are celebrating you tomorrow. Because it brings us back to Scripture. In Scripture, if you have your Bibles, awesome. You can join me to, open it or crack open your don't crack open your cell phone, but open to its app. And if you don't have any of those, here it is on the screen. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. It says, "And these words which I command to you shall be in your" what? Okay, one person's reading with me. Let's try that again. And these words, because I like engagement, okay? "And these words which I command you today shall be in your" Okay, so you can see. It's not too small. It is in your heart. It should be in your heart, right? "You shall teach them diligently." Wait a minute. Let me pause here for a minute. How many teachers do we have here? Moms, you should all raise your hands, right? But formal teachers, to teach diligently, is that a positive thing? Does it come across as something being positive? Doesn't the result should be positive, but when you are in that moment and you're teaching diligently, sometimes it gets overbearing. And sometimes the students are like, enough, we get it. Sounds like a son, right? I get it. My son tells me that all the time. Dad, we got it. "You shall teach them," there you go, "diligently to your," and "you shall talk of them when you" what? "Sit in your house." The text doesn't end here. "When you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you," it sounds like Family Feud. And number one answer is, so let me go back here. "You shall talk of them," them who? Not your neighbor. Them who? "The words in which I command you." Now, who's speaking these words? This is God telling Moses to listen, the words of which I commanded you, I want you to teach them to your children. But now we have to read into this passage because the responsibility to teach diligently fell to whom? The mother. This is not a chauvinistic, inferiorizing, I just made up a word, making women inferior to men, right? making them as if lower than. This is not a paternal or patriarchal society that is driven to the point where the men just sit on their butt and while the women do all the work. That's not what this is saying. But the culture was that the men would provide for the home. They would go out and work. And as they worked, who took care of the children? You know the answer? Moms. And so here there's this identity component that the role of the mom was to teach the words which God has commanded to their children. This is not to belittle. This is not to diminish. This is not to say you are inferior. This is actually you hold the most precious responsibility that God could infer unto humanity. He's saying, teach your children diligently. Talk of them when you sit in your house. Read with me. When you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. How often should you be talking about the words that God has commanded you all the time? It sounds like another text that we read from the Apostle Paul. You should, which is pray without ceasing. In other translations, you have pray always. We should be focusing on the word that God has given. And not only that, listen how he continues. And they shall be as, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. There are times that teaching is not fun. But this isn't just a form of discipleship. This is a lifestyle. When we think back to that earlier statement that your faith should not die with you, it should be carried on after you're gone, it goes to speak to this. Faith is not primarily taught in moments. It is transmitted in rhythms. In your rising up and you're going to bed, your rhythm, what does the rhythm of your life look like right now? Are you too busy to talk about the words that God has commanded to you, to your loved one, to your children? But wait a minute, I don't have any more children. You mean they don't live with you? Oh, yeah, Pastor. They no longer live with me. But your faith isn't something that stops. Your responsibility as a mother never stops. Each time I call home and I tell my parents that I'm going to, when I called them last summer and I told them I was going to Guam for 2 weeks because of the military, the first question is it safe? They always worry. Moms will always worry about their children, no matter how old, no matter where they are, no matter who they're married to, no matter how many kids I will always be a son to my mother, no matter how old I am. And so when we talk about generational faith, it has to be something that is not just taught in the moments. It's got to be carried and transmitted through the rhythms of life. See, children aren't shaped by what we say occasionally. So if we happen to talk about spirituality once in a while, it's not going to have the same impact as if we live it every day. I mean, that makes sense, right? If we're not living every day, how do we expect people to be transformed by it? That takes us to this. 2 Timothy, the text for this morning, Paul's writing to Timothy in affirming this. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother, Lois, and your mother, Eunice. Paul knew that Timothy couldn't be the way he was by himself. Let's be honest. I'm not who I am today were it not for my mother. And my dad, but because this is Mother's Day, and my mother. Some of you would not be here were it not for your mother. Some of you would have a different outlook in life were it not for your mother. I'll go even further. Were it not for your grandmother. I remember distinctively just before my grandmother passed. We were having a conversation in my parents' living room. And she looked at me and she said, "Son, I pray for you." She didn't call me grandson. She called me son. She said, I pray for you every day. And I remember when she passed away, going and doing the celebration of life back in her hometown in Brazil. I remember after that moment, after the service was over, it hit me like a ton of bricks. There's one less person praying for me every day. One less family member praying for me every day. And the moment I start to think about that and the impact it had in my life, without, we take for granted, and when we hear our parents say, "I'm praying for you, son," yeah, thanks. Right? That's typically the reaction we get is that, yeah, I appreciate it. You're doing your job. You are my mother. You're supposed to worry for me. You're supposed to pray for me. But the reality is that what she is doing and what she is conveying is that her faith in God is so great that she wants you to have that same walk with him. And so Lois, Eunice's mom, developed that in her daughter. And in turn, she mirrored what her mother developed in her now to her son. And now Paul, who's writing to him as a mentor, says, "Listen, you are the way you are because of what your mom has done for you. Not only that, but because your grandmother has done for you." Notice the progression here. It lived in Lois, then in Eunice, then in Timothy. Faith traveled through family lines. Going back to that text in Deuteronomy, teach them diligently when you wake up, when you rise up, when you walk, when you sit down at the table, when you go to sleep. There's an article by this psychologist, Susan Newman, that she wrote in Psychology Today on November 18, 2024. She writes that family rituals related to parenting competence, child adjustment, and marital satisfaction, all of these things are attributed when family rituals are established. In other words, when you have a rhythm of teaching your children or passing on your faith or doing anything else, but that becomes a ritual in the family, In the context of this article, she's talking about Christmas. But later, there are other studies. I'm going to share some more with you. She also says this, that traditions pass along family history and values. In this article, she also highlights that shared rituals and traditions amplify family closeness. All of which to say, what psychology is showing us today has already been demonstrated through the Bible. When God tells us that we ought to teach them diligently to have these rhythms of life, we are doing more than just establishing culture. We're establishing an identity. In the book Child Guidance, page 193, it's written that the lessons that the child learns during the first 7 years of life have more to do with forming his character than it learns all in the future years of his life. The importance of passing on that trait, those traits, those characteristics. So the meals. So think about your family traditions. Do you have any? At home, we have a family tradition, and I missed it yesterday in the busyness of life, of gathering together at the end of the week on Friday, and we have a Vespers worship together as a family. That's a tradition. And sometimes, because I am diligent about it, I often hear, do we have to? Because it causes a disruption. But that's exactly what it's meant for. To disrupt our daily rhythm, to stop and say, listen, we need to focus now on God. It's a family tradition. My family did that. My dad's family did that. My mom's family did that. It's become ingrained, and it's become a source of identity for me. On Friday night, if I don't have Vespers on Friday night, it's like, wait a minute, the Sabbath's already started and I haven't even ushered it in. It creates a sense of awareness and identity. But think about the traditions that you have at home, the meals that you always eaten together, the songs you probably sung, the phrases that your parents always used to say. Why do you remember them? You remember them because what is repeated becomes remembered. And what is remembered becomes identity. And if prayer is repeated, if faith is communicated, it becomes identity. If scripture is repeated, it becomes identity. If faith is lived daily, it becomes identity. Moms, you have a sacred influence, one that is often ignored because you are instilling it in the most quietest fashion each and every single day. But it's a powerful one. It's one that others will recognize. It's one that it can be whispered at bedtime, a Bible story, or a consistent example of faith. These moments, they may seem small, but they have everlasting impacts. Your influence is an unceasing sermon. Everything that your mother has done for you, everything that my mother has done for me, that her mother has done for me. I can't speak about my father's mom because she was always sickly ill and there was no relationship there. But I can tell you that part of the reason, a good amount of the reason why I'm here today is because of my family, my mother. I remember when I decided, well, I hadn't decided yet. I had decided to major in theology, and I'm sitting at home after my freshman year in college. And I remember one of my cousins who served as a missionary in Azerbaijan came to present a report to the General Conference in Washington, D.C. At the time, I lived in Massachusetts. And it takes you 8 hours to drive from D.C. to where we lived. I know because I drove there several times. And I remember one day, I'm sitting and I'm watching Formula One, and there's a knock on the door, and here's my cousin, who I wasn't expecting. And he greets my parents, and he says, "Art, I'm here to talk to you." I'm like, "Okay." And we start having this conversation about where I am, where life has led me. And he begins to describe everything that was happening to me. Now, here's the irony of it all. He walks in my parents' house. There's a front door and there's a side door. The side door leads to the staircase down to the basement and then 3 steps into the kitchen. My mom, at the time he walks in, she's fixing something in the kitchen. The door is open. I invite my cousin in. He says, "No, right here is good." And he begins to tell me everything that's happening to me. And I'm listening to him, and I'm not saying a word. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm going to kill my mother. Because I kid you not, details that nobody knew, he shared with me. Things that I was embarrassed about. And then after he grilled me and drilled me all for 10, 15 minutes, he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, "You need to go back to Brazil to major and study there and not here." And I was like, "Okay." He says, "Hey, I got to go." Walked right out the door, back in his car, and then drove to DC. I stood there speechless. My mom is still in the kitchen. And I looked at her and I said, "Mom, did you tell him anything about what's going on with me?" She's like, "No." And I said, "Then I need to go to Brazil so I could study theology down there." And she began to cry right there and then. And I was like, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "You don't know how much I've been praying for you." Yeah, I didn't know. But I do know now. Because it wasn't until a month or two down the road, after I've already arrived in Brazil, my cousin left our house, went to DC, never spoke to him again. And so I'm walking into the cafeteria with my tray in hand, and who do I run into? My cousin. And he's like, "Art, what are you doing here?" And I said, "You told me to come here." He's like, "Yeah, I didn't expect you to come. Where are you sitting? Let's eat together." And we sat down. And he says, "How'd you get here?" And I told him that story. And I've shared this story before. I'm not going to get into it now. But then, as I'm sharing my side of the story that led me to that moment when he walked through the house, he put his hands on the table and began to shake his head. And he says, you know, if you were to tell me that I needed to go to from Washington D.C. to Massachusetts to spend one day with my brother, I would have told you you're crazy. It doesn't make sense to spend 8 hours in a car to go one way, spend a few hours with them, and then go back. His brother did live where we lived. It says, but something wouldn't allow me to rationalize that. Something didn't allow me to say, hey, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to spend 16 hours in a car where I'm going to spend less than 4 hours with my cousin. And he said, I know that was God. And I said, it wasn't just God. It was the result of lots of people praying for me. One of them, my mother. Another one, my grandmother at the time. A mother's influence is an unceasing sermon. And so it is more than fitting that as we celebrate you this weekend, it is important for us to understand the power that you hold. Not just because you have the power of fear in you, but you also have a much greater influence, which is the power of love. The power to project your faith onto somebody and have that impact their life for so much that it can cause change. And I don't know where you are, where your children are today. I don't know what experiences they have. I don't know what you may want for them. Some of you still have kids at home. Some of you do not. But the greatest gift that you can give them is a faith that lives on beyond you. That is your holy tasking. Yes, it is Mother's Day, but the reality is that this can be applied to all of us. A faith that lives beyond us is the greatest responsibility we are given and entrusted with. But because it is Mother's Day, thank you. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you for what you will do. And may God continue to enable you to have a living faith in God, to continue to impact the lives of those He's entrusted to you. May God bless you, and happy Mother's Day.